In this lecture, I'm going to give you an overview of the database that we're going to be creating together in this course. We're going to be creating an employee context database. And I'm going to show you some of the pieces and parts of it in just a minute. But first, let me explain one very important part of Access, and that is Access objects. And objects are basically the building blocks of your database. You can think of it sort of like a car. If a car is your database, then the objects in your car would be the wheels, the axles, the body, and the engine. Well, in Access, the parts of our database are tables, which is where all of your data is stored. These will look familiar to you if you use Excel because they look a lot like spreadsheets. Queries, and the definition of a query is a question. So essentially, these are questions that you ask about the data in the tables. And we design these to do certain searches, essentially, to bring back data that's held in our tables. Then we're going to look at forms. And forms, if you think about our cash register analogy, the form would act as the interface for the employee. Sometimes forms are used to display information. For instance, when the grocery clerk scans or types in your phone number in a form, it'll display the information. But forms are primarily used as an interface for entering data. And then reports is kind of just what it sounds like. It's a document used to display information from your database. So you can think of reports as something that you would print out or save and send to your boss. So your boss says, hey, I want a phone number list of all of the employees in the region. Then you could create a report from your database with the phone numbers of all your employees and send that to your boss. And we're going to create a database step by step using all of these objects. Now there are a couple of other objects included in databases, and those are macros and modules. But we're not going to get into those in this course because that's a much more advanced topic. So now that you have a basic idea of what these building blocks are that we're going to use to create this database, let me just show you a couple of them so you know what they look like. So tables, like I said, are basically look a lot like spreadsheets in an Excel program. You can see that we have columns with headings. So we have our employee ID, first name, last name, home phone, and office ID. And then we have different rows with the entries. So here we have employee number 1 is Bob Blake. Here's his phone number, and he works in Boise. Now one distinction is that in Access, the headers across the top are called fields. So this is your employee ID field, this is your first name field, this is your last name field, this is your home phone field, and this is your office ID field. And the rows are actually called records. So this record has employee number 1, Bob Blake, his phone number, and his office. This record is for Stan Ford, and so on. So the columns are called fields, and the rows are called records. Okay, so that's going to be our main table that hosts the information for this employee contact database. Okay, I'll close that, and let me show you the one other table that we're going to create. And this is a list of the offices where these employees work. So it has the office ID, it has the city, state of the office, and the work phone number for that office. And we're going to connect these two tables so that we can pull this information from here into our employees table. As you see here, you can see the office location is listed here, so that you can start to get an idea of how you can create relationships between tables, which is where the real power of Access begins. And actually, in our final table, this office ID field is just going to show the office ID number, and then it's going to reference the office ID table. And I'll get into table relationships later in the course. So those are the two main tables that we're going to use. Then we're going to get into queries, and I'm just going to show you this one. And as I said, a query is basically just a question that you're asking of your data in your tables. And so in this case, our query is to find out all the employees in the Northwest region. So we have 4 employees in the Northwest region, and they are listed by their city. The awesome thing about queries is you create a query and you can run that query over and over with just the click of the button. So if your boss is always asking you for a list of employees in Los Angeles, for instance, then if you have a created query, then you just click that button and you know who is working in Los Angeles. And obviously these are very small, simple examples of a database, but imagine if you had hundreds or thousands of employees and you really quickly wanted to just get a list of the employees in Los Angeles. You could do that with the click of a button. Of course, if your boss is asking for information from you, you're not going to really want to just send it to him like this, because that's not very professional and presentable looking. So you'd want to send it in a report. So if your boss wants to know who the employees are in the Northwest region, you can have a report that you've created ahead of time, and with just the click of a button, you'll have a printable or emailable report that shows all of the employees in the Northwest region, the city that they work in, and their names. And of course, these can be customized. You can add employee ID numbers, phone numbers, and a whole lot more information. And you can spend a lot of time. There's a lot of art that can go into the design of these as well. This is a very simple, bare bones layout of a report, but you can get as fancy as you want with these. Okay, or if your boss asks for a list of phone numbers for all of the employees, then you've got a nice, clean, printable report right there. So if the list of employees has been changing, say you've added 50 employees and 35 employees quit, but you've been updating that in your employees table here, then as long as that is current, when you run your report here, it's going to show all of that updated instantly. Okay, so that's your reports. And then finally, we have forms. And as I've said, forms are essentially your interface, your user interface. So if you have administrative assistants, anyone doing data entry or point of sale interactions, they're going to be interacting with your database through forms. They're not going to get into your tables and your queries. They're just going to be kind of on the front line here, where they can enter information in the format that you want it to be entered. And they have a button here they can click, and that will give them a new record. They can type in the next name and so on, and select their office ID, and then they're ready to go. And forms are really one of the things that makes Access so powerful, because it allows you to keep front-end users out of all of your data, which makes all of your data back in the tables more secure, and it restricts the way that they're able to enter it in. And by restricting the way that they're able to enter it in, you reduce a lot of errors, which means that when you do queries and reports, it means that the information that you're going to get out of your database is going to be more accurate. For instance, if I was able to type in any office I wanted right here, and maybe I wanted to put LA, right? If I was allowed to go in here and just type in LA, because I know he's in the LA office, right? If I hit enter, it's going to give me an error. It says the text you entered isn't an item in the list. Select my item for the list, or enter text that matches one of the listed items. So I have to say okay, and I have to go back and I have to look at the list and say, oh, it's actually Los Angeles specifically. Okay, and that's office code number 2. And you'll see when I put this in, let's just call this Joe Barnett. Hopefully I spelled that right. Okay, and we've selected Los Angeles, and actually I think Barnett is spelled without an E. So we click Save and Next, and that brings us to a new blank record, but we can go back to our employees table, And you'll see that now we have a new employee listed. We have employee number 13, Joe Barnett, his phone number, and his office location. But if we were allowed to enter in LA here, then you'll notice up here we have Los Angeles, here we have Los Angeles, and then if we had LA here, and we want to do a report showing all the employees living in Los Angeles, so we're specifically searching for the phrase Los Angeles, it would have missed Joe Barnett. And it would show our boss that we have 2 employees in Los Angeles rather than 3. And you can see, especially on a large scale, what a data disaster that could create in your place of business. So let me close out of that. Anyway, so that's your forms, and forms can get very elaborate. You can have entire navigational dashboards with buttons that can allow the users, the front-end users, to click and navigate around to even different forms and different points of entry to make it very robust without them ever being able to get into your actual database. And you know what, I just noticed one thing. I didn't name this right, and that's driving me nuts, so I'm going to change it real quick. And I'm going to show you how to do this later. Just going to change that to employees. That's better. Okay, so that's the database that we're going to create. I'm going to walk you through every step of this, and we're going to do it together, and I'm going to show you everything that I've done so that when you're done here, you're going to be able to create this exact database, and you'll have a pretty solid understanding of how all of these objects works, tables, queries, forms, and reports, and how the tables relate to each other, and how the reports pull off the queries, and how the forms enter information into the tables, and a whole bunch of other tips and tricks along the way.